Aquí la misma historia que aprenden los niños en este país no dice nada, es que no saben ni el 9 de abril qué fue lo que pasó, no, yo no sé qué pasa con la actualidad.
Do you think that the corruption that the 80s got still is nowadays in the 2020? For example, I am watching the series Matarife, and these two characters were mentioned in this series last Friday. So, do you think that it still continue the same kind of corruption in Colombia?
So, guys, let's start with Camilo. We know that Pablo Escobar was very interested in politics and even wanted to become the president of Colombia. Do you think that if he had run for the presidency, he would have won?
Yeah, that's mostly because most people either didn't know what he was up to or they decided to not be aware of that. They decided to ignore it because, okay, he was an awful guy, he was infamous, but you can't deny that he helped the population, the poor population, especially in Medellin, his hometown. So I think that people would have cared about him being a drug dealer, so they would have just voted for him.
Nice. Vale. Why were these two characters forgotten? Why do you think happened that?
Okay, so I think that the reason why these two characters have been forgotten is that people, or mostly younghood, as the teacher said, focus more on like drug dealers and all the money they have and all the power and that stuff. That's why I think that.
So, Gabi, if you had been set the same trap as Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, what would you have done?
I think that I would have done the same as Rodrigo Lara Bonilla because it was for a good cause. He wanted to end the drug trafficking and the power of this infamous character that was Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria.
So, Sergio, let's finish with you. Do you think that the corruption that the 80s got is still nowadays?
In my opinion, yes, because but not in the same way that in the 80s it's supposed to be, because you know that in the 80s the corruption was in the main of the drug dealers and so on. So we can't deny that the corruption in Colombia, it is a situation that is being hard to manage, because nowadays it is a different type of corruption, because nowadays we have seen the corruption more into the politics than into the people that traffic drugs, like in the 80s, like Pablo Escobar. So yes, in my opinion, yes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Bye. We are known by many parts for our history with drug trafficking and by characters such as Pablo Escobar. But have we ever wondered who were those ones who faced these issues, these problems? Before we could talk about forgotten heroes such as Guillermo Cano or Lara Bonilla, we should know who was Pablo Escobar, from whom they became famous, but also for whom they died. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, and died on December 2nd, 1993 in Medellin. He was the Colombian criminal head of the Medellin cartel and probably the most powerful drug trafficker in the world in the 1980s and the early 1990s. But I think everyone knows him, so let's talk about Cano and Bonilla. Guillermo Cano was born in Medellin on August 12, 1925. He started to write for El Espectador as a reporter on ball flights, politics, sport, and culture. Guillermo Cano Izaza was the guide and teacher of a whole generation of journalists, who received from him not only professional training but also the ethical principles that he defended throughout all his life and the exercise of his career as a journalist. But on December 17, 1986, two hitmen of Pablo Escobar from the Medellin cartel assassinated him. They shot him when he was driving down the avenue of El Espectador and he lost the control of his vehicle. And why did they do that? The vertical and extreme defense of his principles caused difficulties to the newspaper. Guillermo Cano and El Espectador became targets of the drug lord since August 25, 1983, when the front page of the newspaper had this scandalous headline. In 1976, Pablo Escobar was imprisoned for drugs. From there, he reaffirmed the idea that drug trafficking was a factor of social corruption, and that it reached sectors of politics, discouraged honest businessmen, and nullified any moral reference for youth. Basically, and in conclusion, he was one of the few brave men that faced the drug problem as it was. He exposed Pablo Escobar and the consequence was his death. Well, I have already told you who was Guillermo Cano and why he was so important for our history. Now let's continue with Lara Bonilla. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was born on August 11, 1946 in Neiva and was a Colombian lawyer and politician who served as Minister of Justice under the government of Belisario Betancourt. He was assassinated by orders of the renowned Pablo Escobar because of his work in the Ministry of Justice, while he prosecuting cocaine traffickers mainly belonging to the Medellin cartel. Lara studied law. Years later, he joined the Liberal Revolutionary Movement Party. It is extraordinary the leadership of this man, because in 1969, when he was only 23 years old, Lara was appointed mayor of his hometown. Only 8 months after he took the Ministry of Justice place, Lara was shot in his white 1976 Mercedes-Benz on the night of April 30, 1984. One of his biggest achievements was that he had Escobar expelled from the Congress and from the United States. Also, we have the assault to Tranquilandia, the biggest coke laboratory in Latin America. At this point, Bonilla signed his death penalty. Unfortunately, it took an assassination for a country to realize the threat that represented the drug trafficking mafias to us.
Pregúntele a cualquiera sabe quién era Pablo Escobar, pero pregúntele a ver si sabe quién eran las víctimas. No lo saben, no se los han enseñado.
It is sad to think that we, almost all the time, remember bad people like Pablo Escobar more than people who, with them actions, managed to generate a positive change. In addition, that we exaltating people like him with series like Narcos. So, how much did you know about them?